Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now. I'm Greg Chris, your host for the show, along with Frank Fear, who will be joining us here in just a moment. Mickey Plumley is unable to join us again, another obligation tonight. So Mickey won't be with us again tonight. But we have a great lineup, and I think you're going to really enjoy our show tonight. We've got a lot to talk about, as always. Mountaineer basketball team. Some of the portal news and transfer news, that sort of thing is going to be in the news from now until spring ball probably. So we'll try to keep you updated on all those things and all the rumors that we hear and information is flying around all over the place. We'll try to keep you up on that. We also want to let you know here up front that we would greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to our show. That helps us tremendously when you do that. All you got to do is get on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We really do appreciate that. And as always, you can join us in the comments section throughout the show if you'd like to do that. Again, like I said, we got a great lineup for you tonight. We have John Antonik going to join us. We're going to talk a little bit about well, we'll let you let him talk about it, and instead of me telling you everything. But he is talking some past WVU football stuff. It's really interesting. It was a great interview. Frank and I recorded Monday night, and that was fantastic. And I think you're really going to enjoy that. And of course, we have our resident basketball expert on with us, Mr. Darryl Prue, going to talk to us about some of the things that he's witnessed with the Mountaineer basketball team in their big win the other night. So we'll get have Darryl on here as well. So we're looking forward to that. So right now, I'm going to bring in Frank Fear. Frank, of course, co-host of the show. Frank, welcome.
Hey, good to see you, Greg. Always look forward to Wednesday night and our great fans. And look at this. I'll tell you, Timothy, we really appreciate your loyalty and your perspective. And thanks so much. And number of folks are here tonight. Jackson Johnson, who is another great fan and knowledgeable as Timothy is. And it's great to see you here, Jackson. And so we really appreciate it. And of course, as you mentioned, we've got our resident guru, Hall of Famer, Darryl Prue, who's been joining us, becoming a regular. We appreciate your being here, Darryl.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm having fun with it.
All right, Darryl, what's up? Hey, Frank, before we go any further, I want to say, too, you mentioned a couple of our viewers here. One that I want to mention as well, I think we got off the last time I talked about him, and I wanted to tell a little story about him, Kelly McCourt, who joins us every week. Kelly friended me last week or 2 weeks ago, something on Facebook. The other night, I was driving home from Morgantown by myself, and it was wasn't late, but it was dark, and that's a pretty long trip if you go from Morgantown to Oak Hill, and you do it 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes it could get tiresome. But Kelly got on a messenger and started talking to me, and he and I talked all the way home. So for 2 hours, we discussed WVU sports and a variety of other things that we had in common, and that was a lot of fun. I know he watches the show every week, and we really appreciate Kelly. He has a lot of good insight, and he speaks about you often too, Frank, just so you'll know. But he's a follower.
Oh, yeah. Always enjoy Kelly. And again, another knowledgeable fan. We were going back and forth today about whether that Alabama offensive guard, I think is, or a tackle, I can't remember, who went into the portal. Would West Virginia get him? There's been a lot of chatter about that today. But I mentioned to Kelly, the rumor now is, or at least the thinking is, he's from Iowa. And it looks like he may end up back at, he may be a Hawkeye in the future. But yeah, you're right. Even though the portal is closed, all the players who declared before that have a period of time. And then, of course, the ones who have graduated have more time than that. So we're going to see a lot of activity. We'll need to have Randy Flincham back, our resident portal guy who just keeps up with this, all the information up to date, does a great analysis. And so, and with Darryl covering WVU basketball, we know the numbers are going to be down tonight of fans because both men and women are playing tonight.
Playing games,
One is 7 and 8. So anyway.
Yeah, and I know. I think I mentioned this in our messages back and forth. I think Darryl and I have the same guru we focus in on these basketball. I read his notes, and I'm like, man, wow. That's exactly some of the things I was thinking, about this basketball team, and we can't do anything about. I've learned when you try to schedule these things, you just got to get a night and go with it. And if you run into conflicts, you run into conflicts. That's the way it happens, and you can't.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Look at this guy.
Dave Gorby.
It takes a legend to know a legend. There's David Gorby.
That's his. He's the legend, and he's calling us legends. Dave Gorby's the legend.
He's great.
I met I was going to tell you, Frank, at our board meeting tonight, I met a former Mountaineer great football player, and I'm sure you guys will remember him by the name of Gary Tompkins. And he works with some veterans programs up here, and we're going to be collaborating on some stuff that we're doing together. So I got him scheduled for the court side with Coach Chris show, but not this one yet. So we'll work on that.
Great.
Not that my allegiance is over.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, where do you want to start, Greg? We got a lot to talk about. I'll turn to you and lead us through this.
Well, why don't we go ahead and let's talk about this basketball team a little bit to begin with, and then once we wrap up the basketball, we can bring John's interview on, and we'll listen to him. But the basketball team with I think a huge win, and they may not win 6 or 7 more games, but that to me was a huge win right there. Kind of showed what they're capable of. And I'm not going to step on Darryl's toes here. I know he's got some analysis on it. We all watched, I'm sure. And, the one big thing, Darryl, that I noticed was that we shared the ball a little bit better on offense, and our defense actually played some defense for a change. So I'm not going to take any of your thunder. You go ahead and let's hear your take on it.
Yeah, it looks like they listened to the scouting report and got the defense together. They switched up the offense a little bit, ran like a little bit of a beeline / Princeton, bring the guy to the high post, and get a guy cutting back door. Then instead of just going pick and roll,
Right.
And that little scissor cut they do off the high post. So they did some different things, and I think the tweak in the lineup. Nobody said anything about this, but Johnson going in for Farrakhan, you got another ball handler who's willing to facilitate.
Yep.
I don't think Farrakhan's a facilitator. Nothing. He's a good player. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But he didn't facilitate. You have him and Battle trying to battle for shots, and I think it kind of disrupted the rhythm a little bit. But I think Quentin Johnson in there, and Sumnick has found his little role. So when the big fella comes back, him and Sumnick are going to be pretty good together.
Yeah, and I think that switch up on offense, and again, when you played as much basketball as you have, and you've coached as much as you have, and I coached for 30 years, you notice things like this. But looking at their offense, with that change up on offense, I think they're that really bodes well. I think for the athleticism that they have. We're not huge, we're not big. But you're very athletic, very quick, and I think an offense like that, where they're moving, back cutting, those sorts of things, really suits them a lot better.
Yeah, it's hard to score on people when you got 5 eyes, 5 sets of eyes looking at you because you're just going.
Yep.
And everybody can see when you start cutting and moving. I think they did a good job of starting the ball on one side of the floor to get into the other side and starting the offense. Rotate from one side. So now that the shell have to switch sides, and now you have cutters. Now you're not in normal spots, and you're all different areas. Now you got to read more than just react. So it was a good philosophy of how they changed the offense.
Yeah, I notice. I'm looking here at your points that you put out. The rebounding was so much better. I mean, it was so noticeable how much better they rebounded, and they actually all were going for rebounds. I know we talked last week that a team like that, with the size that we have, if we're going to be a good rebounding team, then we have to have 5 people rebounding every shot, and I think we got a little bit of that the other night.
Oh yeah, it was Farrakhan. You can see Farrakhan coming down, getting some rebounds, especially some of those long rebounds.
Yep.
Instead of standing at the 3-point line and his man's not in the play. When them guys out there battling and these long shots come off, they did a much better job. And I think Sumnick did a great job of setting the tone. They threw it to him. They threw it to him in the post. It was a lot of paint touches. I forgot to put that down. There was a lot of paint touches. the last game, and they they got some unique talent, but I was talking to Coach Callett, 'cause I might come down Saturday. I want him to go to the game with me, and he was like he liked Farrakhan. He liked the pieces they have. He just like he put it together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you look at them individually. I mean, they're athletic. They can score the ball. They're quick. They have all those ingredients. But I think, like we talked last week, when you come down the floor and you're making one pass and jacking a three, you're not going to have success like that unless you're just awfully good at shooting the basketball. And I don't think we're good enough shooting the basketball to be playing like that. And that's why I was so tickled to see, the change up, on offense and the way we ran offense. It looked so much better. Got everybody involved, and that's, I don't know what you think. And this is just me throwing this out here, but I think when you have all five people involved on that offensive end, then, it makes you a better rebounding team. It makes you a better defensive team because everybody's involved. Everybody's moving. Everybody's playing. A lot of times when you're standing around watching somebody else play, it's awful hard to get involved on that defensive side. And I really think that the offense that we ran, I think benefited our rebounding and our defense a huge amount. I don't know what you think about that, but that was my thoughts.
No, it's just it's the old adage is five guys playing as one. If five guys is playing as one on both ends of the floor, you got a good chance of winning.
Right.
So if five guys, everybody know where the shots are coming from. Everybody's touched the ball. Everybody's getting the feel. Like how many times some of them didn't shoot that much the whole year last year.
No,
You know what I mean? Like the whole year last year, they didn't shoot like that. And they was feeding them, they was trusting him, and he made some good plays. He was hustling, and it got contagious. You know what I mean? So and then I think Josh did a really good job of coaching. He put the subs in at the right time. He matched the guys up together better. You know what I mean? Like what's his name? Come off the bench. Szynski did a pretty good job of coming off the bench and giving us a lift. He makes some good plays. He's a difficult guard. So he has a little guy. He goes in the post. He has, he can stretch you out too, and he can make passes. So just the combinations he put in and how they put him in, and when he put him in I thought was kind of perfect almost.
He did a great job. Yeah, he did. He did a really good job. And I think again, you've got some guys out there who are super players. But again, like you said, it's five people, and getting everybody involved like that, I think helps all of them. And some of them may not be scoring quite as many points as they are used to scoring, but you're going to maybe see some victories. And one of the things I caught my attention as well, we scored 76, 77 points. I don't know exactly what it was. So we didn't score a huge amount of points, but we played better defense. We rebounded the basketball and we won the game. And that's what it boils down to. You want that W. And I just think that Josh did a good job, like you said, with the substitutions. Seemed like he made all the right calls. And again, I think he's going to get better at that. We have to remember, he hadn't been a head coach before, and you're up there making the decisions, and that's a little different than sitting there when you have a Hall of Fame guy walking around in front of you making all the decisions, and you're just backing him up. When you got to make those decisions yourself, it's a little bit different, and I think he's getting better and better at the game, the game coaching. So I just hope it continues, and I think if they keep moving the ball like that on offense, sharing the basketball, hitting the boards, they're going to be okay because, like I said, they're athletic. There's some good basketball players on that team. Frank, I don't know what you thought about it. I neglected to ask you your thoughts on the game. I'm sure you watched it, and sure you have some insight as well.
Well, one of the things that Darryl talked about on his Prue's points was the energy they started playing with. They came out and they didn't have the long gaps they've had, but it's a work in progress. When you look at where this team started, you lose to Radford at home, you beat Texas at home, two ends of the continuum. And so I think we have to be patient, given the fact that it's like Humpty Dumpty putting Humpty Dumpty back on the wall, and that's where we are. So I think we have to really have faith in the team, be patient, and we'll see what happens tonight. We'll give a score update. The other thing I wanted to have Darryl talk about, and you too, Greg, is all the upsets that occurred last week in major college basketball. the legend here is the teams in red are the Big 12 teams, but there were 10 losses suffered by last week's top 10, and most of those losses were to unranked teams. I'm not sure I've seen that before. What are your thoughts, guys, on this?
Go ahead, Darryl.
It's just this is with the portal. I think teams are much stronger than before because you have older guys playing now. So some of that is that sometimes it's just this part of the year. You know what I mean? Sometimes people take teams lightly. I don't. One of my notes about Texas, did they really come to play? You know what I mean? I don't think they was ready to play. I didn't think West Virginia was going to play that good. So then they try to fight the end. With 3 minutes left, it was the score was in the 50s. Yeah. You know what I mean? So they scored a lot of points in the last 3 minutes. So then they try to turn it on. It was it's too late. So sometimes you lose to these teams. Iowa State's not a bad team. TCU, Big 12 is not a bad team. It's Houston's first time in the Big 12, so they're going to have some bumps. They're not going to run through the conference like they ran through the early part of the year. To go back to what Greg said and you said, Frank, this team is new. This team is different from the team they started off with at the beginning of the season because of all the people who wasn't playing. So they're still trying to get a feel of everybody, and the players are trying to get a feel of everybody else. So it's a disadvantage to Josh. One of the things I thought would have helped, I thought they were supposed to go to Europe this summer. Even though they didn't have everybody, I would have took 7 over there. Yep. You would have took that 7 and got a feel and got your bumps in, and over there, and to help you out with the coaching and stuff like that, because that time right there would have been helpful for now. But he did a great job. He adjusted. They adjusted. Sometimes a sign of a good coach is adjustments. Making adjustments and not winning all the games all the time, especially with the hand he was dealt with.
Yep, and to hear Darryl say that, it's so true. The years that I coached was a head coach. I took my high school team, every year we went to a team camp somewhere where we go and spend a week and a half. And I took them every year regardless. We found somewhere to go because I always felt like it was so important for them to get, the chemistry of being together, getting to know each other, hanging out together, and then, coaching the games helped me and my assistant coaches. And we did that every year. And now I hear, stories coming back from former players. Man, we had a great time doing that. That was so fun, which it was. But it was, my purpose for doing it, of course, was to let them have some fun. But and they also had a social every week for the coaches, which I always enjoyed. But it was to get them to play together, to have some chemistry building time and that sort of thing. Spent the nights together. So I always did that, and I think that would have been very, very important for them. I think it'd been great if they could have done that. But he's doing a good job with them now, and they are starting to round into shape. As far as these teams, these upsets, it's like Darryl said right at the beginning, this transfer portal thing, the portal. I said 2 or 3 years ago on my show, we talked about it a lot. And I always said I felt like in basketball, I always felt like the portal was going to level the playing field, because, you're going to be at Duke and you've got, 5-star players starting, and you have 3 5-star players sitting on the bench because it's Duke. Well, those 3 5-stars sitting on the bench are thinking, hey, I can go to WVU or Houston or wherever and start, and be in a conference and all that. So I think, a lot of these players who are these 4 and 5 stars that end up on the bench for people like Duke, Michigan, North Carolina, wherever, Houston now, they're going to end up going other places. And I think in basketball, it levels the playing field a little bit because there's only so many players. In football, it's kind of a different story because you have, so many people that you have to deal with, and makes it a little bit more difficult. But, I think it gives other places opportunities to get some of these 4 and 5 stars that wouldn't have got them in the past, because of the portal allows them to see their situation and then make a decision based on that. They can leave Duke, if basketball is what they're wanting to do. If they can leave Duke and go to WVU, they may do that. So I think that's a lot of it. I think there's a little bit more parity in basketball than what there has been in the past 5, 6, 7 years. I think the parity, and I think it's getting closer and closer and closer with a lot of teams. And again, you may not like the portal, but the portal is here, and you have to learn how to use it. And I think that's what you're seeing. I think that's a big part of it. So I don't know, Frank, what you think. I know you pay attention to those kind of trends and stuff, but I think that's my opinion on what's causing some of this. Because I mean, let's face it, who would have ever guessed Kansas would lose to UCF? I mean, just would never happen. But when you see these teams play, they're pretty good basketball teams, and they got some players. And I just think that's a lot of it. I just think the parity, there's more and more parity each year. And I think the portal's mostly responsible for that.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the things we have to understand is this myth that, the path is made by us. We decide what we want to do. We have strategies and so on. Hey, NIL came to us through court action, lawsuits. And so as a consequence, the universities didn't want it. It was essentially shoved down the universities' throats by the initial lawsuit and then state by state with their NIL laws. And it's been a leveler. I mean, it's been a great leveler. So I think you're absolutely correct. And I think it's not only happening in basketball, but I think we're seeing it in football as well. And we're going to see more of it. Now, obviously, the NIL is driven by money and the schools that have more capacity. But we're also seeing, this past week where the NCAA sanctioned Florida State for abusing NIL at Florida State. And basically what they did is they disconnected Florida State from their NIL collective for 1 year.
Yeah.
So it's almost like saying you can't go to your bank account for 1 year. Right. Now, look at that. So, I think you're absolutely on target. I think you're absolutely on target.
I think the piggyback off what y'all said, too, is like now, you add the NIL, you add COVID. Now you got guys that playing college basketball and football at 25, 26, 27 years old. Yep. And, at 25, 26, when I was making money overseas. You know what I mean? So that's, they're playing against 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds. So guys are coming in later and leaving later, So, that, playing against a grown man in high school, high school age kids is a big difference. The maturity, how you handle things, your body, what to do. Houston probably got a whole team full of 23, 24-year-olds, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you can withstand it, it's coaching. I've watched over the years how, we see it in the NCAA where these smaller schools, we all coach teams. They have 4-year seniors beat the one and done teams, right? Because they work together, play together. They're not scared. So it's there's a whole bunch of stuff that has accumulated and to make these teams on par.
Yeah, you'd always hear people talking about that big upset, but then you look at these teams and these guys have been together for 4 and 5 years. They're not upset. So there's a reason why those teams are winning those games, because they're good. They play together, mature. They're grown men, basically. And Frank, we have, I don't know if it's on this show or what, we interviewed someone and they talked about the next thing coming is eligibility for length of time you can play. Somebody, I don't remember who we were talking to, but mentioned the fact that I believe it was last week. He said, the next thing coming is eligibility, which means they can play as long as they want to. You can't tell somebody how long they can earn money at a certain job. And he said, you don't tell a lawyer you can only work 4 years and then you have to go find something else to do.
I think that was Tony Altimore.
I think it was.
That was Tony.
Basically said, you guys can play as long as you want. And I think you're going to see more and more of that with the NIL and the portal. A lot of these guys making money in college, they may never make it in the NFL. Most of them aren't going to make it in the NFL. So they're making money there in college. Why would they want to leave?
Yeah. And I would say too, Greg, if we take the same theme and switch it to football, This came out last week. Right after the championship game, football. Here. I think we may have shown this last week, but incredible difference in 1 week, where the various sources said, "Here's what we think is going to happen. We predict for 2024." And if you look at that first column with the school there, Arizona, odds on to win the Big 12, be a top 10. And that was last week. Well, what happened is Jed Fish leaves. And you and I were talking about this earlier today. He took 9 of his assistants with him to Washington. Because the Washington coach went, and all this happened so quickly. He went to DeBoer goes to Alabama. And so what's going to happen to Arizona that works so hard, being 10-31 over the last 5 years to have a 10-3 season. And now the question is, my God, what's going to happen next? And so it just goes to show you that things are more, I don't want to say unstable, but less predictable than ever.
Right. And I know Kelly and I were talking about this on my way up to Morgantown today, about Arizona losing their coaches. They also, and David, I just pointed this out. That's what I was getting ready to say. 9 Arizona players entered the portal in the past 30 minutes. They're leaving there like crazy. And I saw one prognosticator who had Arizona picked to win the Big 12 had already changed and said he had put WVU as the odds-on favorite to win the Big 12, and Arizona was down to like 6th or 7th. So it happened quick, and that's why, like you said, these and I'll say this again. I've been on this horse for years. These predictions and these top 25s that they come out with, they come out with that top 25. It'll be, you'll be sitting in August, and WVU won't be in that top 25. If they are, they'll be 24th, and if they lose a game, they're gone. And you take somebody like Alabama, for example, who's ranked number 2, or Georgia number 1, and they lose a game, they drop down to 7th. And it's so hard for teams like West Virginia to crawl back up in there, no matter what they do. And it's so hard for teams like West Virginia to get back up in that mix when they have them ranked so low to start with. And I think there needs to be something done about that. Not, it's not just a, hey, we want to be ranked thing. It's a fair thing. It's unfair to teams like WVU and Syracuse or whoever. One of those teams. It's unfair to them to start out being ranked so low and lose a game somewhere along the line and are done. Where these other teams, these blue bloods as they call them, they have them ranked up there in the high in the top 10. If they lose a game, they drop 1 or 2 spots and they're still right in the mix. Darryl, I want to ask you before we get to John here. I thought last week that was a shelf beside you. Is that a trophy beside you over your shoulder?
Yeah, I got my little trophy case.
And that's got to be like, did you win a national championship in something?
No, I was an MVP of some league. I was in high school.
Some league out there.
Yeah, I can't remember. I got a bunch of little trophies over here.
I saw that trophy. I was like, man, I thought that was a shelf. That's a trophy sitting there. I just want to find out
that's a shelf.
Yeah.
This my grandmother had this to put all my stuff in there. So yeah,
awesome. Well, I mentioned you guys earlier tonight. I was talking to Dr. Roy Tunick here at a board meeting, and I mentioned that you'd be on with us discussing basketball, and he's like, he had the sweetest jump shot. And I said, left-handed stroke. Well, Frank, I guess we're moving along here. We probably need to go ahead and get to John's interview. It was pretty long, so we probably need to move on to that. I don't want to throw it right at you and not have you prepared. As soon as you get ready to put that on, just let me know. We'll go to that. That was a fantastic interview that you did with John. Very interesting, captivating. Got a lot of good information. Can't wait to get him back on again. He was fun.
Yeah, the thing for those of you who don't know John Antonik works for WVU. He's a WVU alum. He's a senior director of athletic content, which means he writes a lot. In fact, he couldn't be with us live tonight because he's at the women's game, and he wished he could have been with us, but we were able to tape him. Greg and I did. And one of the things and you're going to hear me talk about it, is this is the time of the year, I think, when we can not only look forward, but also do reflections on the past. And, John's a sports historian and he focuses on WVU. So what you're going to get right now, and we're going to have to split this up because it's almost 30 minutes. So we're going to do it in 4 segments, and we'll do it like in 7-minute segments. And you'll have a chance to digest, and we'll take a few minutes to post your comments, and then discuss a bit, and then go on to the next one. But you're going to learn a lot tonight. Greg and I learned a lot. Absolutely. This guy is a walking encyclopedia of WVU football, and he has some really insightful things to say. So let's turn to, I'm going to put us all in the back room right now, and we're going to put John up right. Well, Greg and I are absolutely delighted to have with us today our guest, John Antonik. For those of you who know John, his work is just fantastic. He is the Senior Director of Athletic Content, writes regularly, and you'll find it. We'll have that a link in the comments section so you can go to his work if you're not familiar. But Greg and I think there's nobody better in the country who focuses on the history of the institution the way that John focuses on WVU sports. And we were both taken by a number of recent articles, all the articles actually he writes. They're all worth reading. But now that we're at the end of the WVU season, there's a pivot point. We're looking forward. We're taping this a week after the national championship game, and sources are already coming out with the way too early rankings for the 24 season. But it's also a time to look backward, to look at what happened in history. And John did that with a recent article, and he focused on strength of schedule and looked at WVU football from a strength of schedule point of view. Some really interesting data, and always with John's work, you'll learn something, you'll learn a lot, and there are things that I didn't know. And I won't give you the title of the article because it gives it away. But John, talk to us about why you decided to take a focus on strength of schedule for WVU football, what you found and what surprised you.
Well, I was talking to Jed Drenning on one of the broadcasts, and we were just talking about different schedules through the years. And I mentioned I had done kind of a deep dive and just looked at every schedule that West Virginia played going back to really 1915. And the reason 1915 is that was when WVU really started to play more national teams and became more focused on football. So I went back and I researched them, and I've got mountains of material in my house from years of doing research, and looked at each team, each season. And obviously there's different ways that you can compare schedules. If you take, for instance, Neil Brown, he's played power conference schools, 11 power conference schools the last 3 years. That's tough. You can look at nationally ranked teams and the number of nationally ranked teams on your schedule. Dana Holgerson played the most in 2017. He played 6. Or you can look at winning percentage. Every schedule going back, there are power conference schools, there are local schools, FCS type schools, small schools. So I looked at winning percentage, and there was a run there in the 20s, the late 20s, when West Virginia was playing schedules against teams that were with winning percentages combined in the high 60s, and even one instance in 1929, 70%. Those teams won 70% of their games. Those are hard schedules. And then there have been some years, particularly in the years in the Southern Conference, as you know, you wrote the book, The Band of the Brothers, the late 60s, early 70s, when West Virginia was transitioning out of the Southern Conference into playing an Eastern Independent schedule, and they weren't playing very difficult schedules. Mm-hmm. So, and what I've found too, through just years of doing this, talking to different people, researching, whatnot, generally speaking, when West Virginia had manageable schedules, they had great seasons. And when they had difficult schedules, they struggled a little bit. There were very few instances when West Virginia played a really difficult schedule and performed well. I mean, I could give you one example right off the top of the bat. is the 1988 season. That's considered the greatest season in school history. And I have it right here. West Virginia that year in 1988, they went undefeated, obviously. And in that season, West Virginia played 2-8-1 Bowling Green, 5-6 Cal Fullerton, which dropped football. Maryland was 5-6 that year. Pitt was 6-5. Virginia Tech 3-8. East Carolina 3-8. Boston College 3-8. Penn State, the only losing season Joe Paterno had was that year. They were 5-6. Cincinnati 3-8. Rutgers 5-6. Syracuse 10-2. That was a really good win. So there was a season where everything came together. A really good team playing a really manageable schedule gets to the national championship.
Wow. What do you think, Greg?
Oh, and that's not to take anything away from the season. That's
yeah.
the schedule that they played. But that's kind of the context. When people look at seasons, they rarely remember, they look at bowl games, they look at things. They rarely remember all of the circumstances that go into it. All they remember is, did they win? Did they lose? What was the outcome? That's just the general mindset of but that's an example of having a manageable schedule and getting to the national championship game.
Wow.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it, but I'm guessing that our years in the Big East, when we had some of those really good seasons, and again, I haven't looked at schedules or anything, but I'm guessing that those years when we were in the Big East and had those great runs, probably the schedules weren't real tough then either, just based on the teams that are in the Big East. We're in the Big East.
Yeah, I mean, when Rich took the job in 2000, Miami was as good as anybody in the country.
Right.
If you compare the Big 12 to what the Big East was when Miami, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Boston College, very, very comparable. I'm not sure, even in the years that Oklahoma had their run, they weren't as good as Miami was in the late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, that was the type of schedules that West Virginia was playing. Virginia Tech was excellent. They were every bit as good as, if you want to compare them, you could take Miami and compare that to Oklahoma, take Virginia Tech, compare it to Texas, pretty comparable. And then obviously those teams leave. There's an opportunity there, and Rich was able to take advantage of it. And he went out and recruited Pat White. He recruited Steve Slayton, Owen Schmidt, and get lightning in a bottle. Get the right, everything kind of works together, and they have that great run. One of the great runs in school history.
What do you guys think?
Frank, after we talked to him the other day, I started thinking about this. You look at teams like Alabama, Georgia, Michigan. I know what people think of those teams. They're the best team in the country, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of times they are. But if you look at their schedules, I would venture to guess that those schedules would be comparable, to West Virginia's great seasons. And because, just because you play Florida, for example, does not mean that Florida's good, or LSU or Auburn or whoever they play in the SEC. People just look at that and think, well, they're playing the SEC schedule. Well, yeah, they are, but that doesn't mean that it's a good schedule, And if you look at Alabama and some of those teams, especially Alabama, they play. They play some bad out of conference games. I mean, they just play horrible out of conference games, and for a reason, And so I think, that what John was talking about there not only affects WVU or other schools similar to WVU. I think it's everybody. I think that's everybody. And there's some years when Georgia probably can beat anybody in the country. But not always. Those schedules aren't always the best. Even though there's teams that you recognize on there, does not mean those teams are good. Darryl, I don't know what you think about that, but that's my thoughts.
I mean,
I played for basketball, doesn't it, Darryl, too?
I mean, it's a couple of things. I don't know all the football records, but some of those teams in the SEC are really good. Always was good, especially back then. I remember we was in the Big East. I was with Georgetown, and the league was really tough.
Yes.
And Virginia Tech leaves. They were in the bottom half of the Big East. They go to the ACC and then the top half.
Right.
So it's it's some leagues are top heavy. Like the Big East basketball was heavy all the way through.
Oh yeah.
Like SEC, they are top heavy with Georgia, Florida, Alabama, some Auburn. So then you get the Kentuckys on football, they're not as good. You know what I mean? So
right.
I get what you're saying, but those teams, they do battle each other and do have a playoff.
Oh, yeah.
Back when the Big East football was around, it was that it was Syracuse, West Virginia, and who else? You know what I mean? So
right.
I mean, when they made the move to Big 12, I thought ACC would have been a more natural move. But I think that's why the makeup it is and how they rank people now is by who you play, strength of schedule. They do all that stuff because of you only have a one win against a team that has a winning record. You go to the national championship. Is that fair to the team? You know what I mean? Like, we've seen it. We just saw it this year with Florida State. So it's people who never played football, who never played basketball, are in control of these situations now.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the second clip. John offered a lot more. Yeah, that was worth the price of admission. But so I'll put you guys back again in our locker room and. Yeah, when you think about it, this is one of the values, I think, of John, at looking at anything through the lens of history, because we tend to focus only on the outcome. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what are the circumstances that may have contributed to it? And you and I have had a conversation about Pappy Lewis, and many people think that's really when West Virginia football got on the map nationally. Of course, they went to a big bowl game, Sugar Bowl, to play Georgia Tech. But the bottom line is that a lot of people criticized, as you mentioned in the article and also on this interview, criticized those schedules. I mean, a ton of undefeated seasons in the Southern Conference. But as I mentioned in the book, and obviously the Southern Conference in the 50s was not the Southern Conference it was in the 40s and the 30s, when you had the Southeastern Conference teams. They're now Southeastern Conference teams like Alabama were there in the 20s, left in the 30s. And then the Atlantic Coast Conference was established essentially the mid 1950s. And so, when Pappy was cruising through for the most part, the Southern Conference, it was just Virginia Tech and West Virginia left. And
Give you an example. When Lewis took the job in 1950, the Southern Conference still had Clemson in it, still had Maryland in it. It was considered a major conference. North Carolina was in it. They left in 1952. Those schools broke away, formed the ACC, and then the year that happens is the year West Virginia goes to the Sugar Bowl. The year 1953, look at this. They played Pitt. Pitt was down. And they were ranked when they beat Pitt, but Pitt ended the year 3-5-1. Pitt was playing incredibly hard schedules back then. They played Waynesburg. They played Washington and Lee. They played George Washington, VMI, beat a pretty good Penn State team that was 6-3 that year, beat Virginia Tech 5-5. They lose to South Carolina, which was good. And then they beat a really bad NC State team to get in the Sugar Bowl. I mean, it was the record of the teams that year were 49, 45-2, just barely 500. They get to the Sugar Bowl, and then of course after that, there was some criticism. West Virginia had criticism because they were playing weak schedules. They were in the top 10. So Lewis says, "Okay, let's play tougher schedules." And they go to Illinois, they go to Wisconsin, they go to USC, and Art Lewis is scouting for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1960.
Yeah, you pointed out in the article how painful, you didn't use that word, I will, how painful that 59 season was.
Yeah.
And it was obviously the end of the era. Nothing lasts forever. But if you look at that compared to, say, 55, 54, and of course the run with 3 straight wins over Penn State was a high. But yeah, history is a great teacher. And as we were talking before the program, one of the reasons you want to look at history is, and perhaps you can talk about this a bit, is patterns. What happens before tends to happen again.
It does. It does. And, you generally speaking, when you talk about the history of West Virginia, there are patterns. West Virginia, going all the way back to the 1920s, they would play weak schedules, build up, win games, get criticized, beef up the schedule, then struggle. Rat Rogers, when he took over for Clarence Spears, he was playing some incredibly hard schedules. Spears started that, then left and went to Minnesota, and then ultimately Rogers was forced to resign after the 30 season. They bring in Greasy Neal. Greasy Neal took Washington Jefferson to the Rose Bowl, the famous scoreless tie against Cal. Of course, Greasy Neal is in the Hall of Fame. He's a pro football coached the Eagles and the Steagles when they were combined with the Steelers, and then coached the Eagles to an NFL championship. He couldn't win here. He couldn't win against those schedules. And then they went through coach after coach. And the average life expectancy of a football coach until Lewis got here was 2.5 years. Yeah. And Art Lewis kind of stabilized it. He kind of hit it right because he was a great recruiter. And at the time in the state, the mining industry was at its peak. Your population in around 1950 was about 2 million. The chemical industry over in the Kanawha Valley and up and through the Ohio Valley, there were a lot of good players. And there were a lot of good players in West Virginia that were going to other schools. One year, when General Neyland coached at Tennessee, half the starting lineup came from West Virginia. George Cathco was a great player at Tennessee. He was from Oak Hill. West Virginia was sending players all over the country. There were guys going to Michigan, Pitt, some of Pitt's great. Marshall Goldberg is one of the great players in Pitt history. He's from Elkins. Ippy Welch from Parkersburg was a great player for Pitt. These were all American type players. Cathco, I think, finished second in the Heisman Trophy balloting the year that he. So there were great players in West Virginia. Lewis was the first coach to really tap into it and keep those guys home. I mean, you had in that year when he got Bruce Bosley and Fred Wyant and Sam Hubbard. Bosley wasn't even known. He was over in Greenbank. Nobody even knew about him. And the story goes is that when they were putting together the rosters for the North-South game, I think might have been the South. I don't know. I think Bosley played for the South. One of the two teams was down a player, and Lewis said, "Listen, I know a player that you can get to fill that roster, but you got to protect me. I don't want any coaches tampering with this guy." And so he recommended that they go get Bruce Bosley. Of course, everybody saw him and go, "Oh my God, this guy's an Adonis. He's incredible." Those were the kinds of players that West Virginia was getting in the early 50s. And then the well kind of ran dry. After Wyatt played on a 2-win team at Weston, played both ways, was a defensive back and quarterback and ran the ball all the time. And Lewis said, "That's my perfect T quarterback." And he turned out to be perfect for what they were doing. And these were all West Virginia guys. That Sugar Bowl team, all those guys were from right around Morgantown. You got Joe Marconi was just right across the border in Fredericktown. He went to Maryland and then left after a week and came here and was a great player for West Virginia. Bobby Moss, of all those guys, was probably the most highly recruited of them all from Huntington. These were all good players, and Lewis tapped into that, and it really helped West Virginia. The well kind of ran dry moving into the 60s.
Incredible tour through history, guys. I'll tell you. And I'm glad he talked about Pappy Lewis, because Pappy Lewis was the guy. When I was doing the book, the thing that struck me, and I didn't really put 2 and 2 together until I talked with John, coaches didn't last very long. 2.5 years, and then all of a sudden Pappy Lewis is there for a decade.
Yeah, pretty amazing. And the list of names he went through there, Of course, if you're not a Mountaineer historian a little bit, you probably didn't recognize some of those names, or a West Virginia historian a little. You probably didn't recognize some of those names, but it's like I mentioned, I think later on in the interview, maybe when you go back, it'll come up. These guys were not only good football players, they were Hall of Fame football players, some of them, and all pro NFL guys. These guys were phenomenal, and right here in our own backyard. And a lot of people complain, have complained over the years about us not taking West Virginia players. Back then is the case where there were lots of West Virginia players and we didn't get any of them. And I think I mentioned in the interview, Neil Brown seems to be doing a little better job of that, nailing down some of these West Virginia guys, because there are football players here, and I don't know how many. And I mentioned him too as well. Cafago, there's the road named after him. It's a mile from my house, Cafago Road, and of course Lonnie Warwick lives 5 miles from me in Mount Hope, and these guys, I mean, phenomenal football players. And to hear the history and some of them that he mentioned, I hadn't thought about. I'd heard the names and all that, didn't realize they were from West Virginia and played at these other schools. So I think now it's a little easier now though to see them. Back then you didn't have internet and FaceTime and Yard, whatever this is called, Yardbird. I don't know what their stream was, but you didn't have that kind of stuff back then. And now, if players are out there, they find them typically, and I think Brown's doing a pretty good job with that.
Yeah. And he's going to talk about that a bit more.
Yeah.
But I think for all of us, Pappy Lewis, Art Lewis is a name that we need to know, because he was one of those guys that came in right time, right coach at the right time. And now in the next segment, John's going to talk about the next major coach. And what's interesting is that Art Lewis came to West Virginia. It was really his first contact with the university. And the guy that John's going to talk about now, Jim Carlin, is exactly the same. So let's listen to this clip.
And then, of course, Jim Carlin came in 1966 and kind of changed everything. I think Jim Carlin was the guy that really put West Virginia on the path to where we are today. He was the guy that was thinking big. He was the guy that was going around to the Kiwanis Club and the different places and speaking about Mountaineer football and the things that people needed to do here and how they needed to think to put this in a different trajectory. And I was, guys that I talked to that covered him always thought that the first brick in Mountaineer Field was laid when Jim Carlin got here, because he got people thinking differently.
Yeah, no question. Disappointed again this year that he didn't get voted into the College Hall of Fame. But I agree with you. And of course, the people I interact with all the time would agree with that too, because they played for him. But he did change the narrative, and he just went across the state. And I'm not sure he was a Pappy Lewis clone, but those personalities, obviously Pappy Lewis was gregarious, and Jim Carlin was really more of a CEO type. But boy, got it done. Greg, your thoughts? This is, to me, it's like going to a 3-credit seminar listening to John.
Yes, it is. And, when you hear some of those names he throws out, it's amazing to hear those names and know. I mean, like when he mentioned Cafago, I mean, I live 5 minutes from Cafago Road right out here.
Right.
And of course, we've got Lonnie Warwick right here. And you think about all these folks in the past that were just, I mean, like he said, all-American NFL football players.
About the black players like Lionel Taylor.
Right.
Go on and on and on. Charlie Cowan, all these guys from down in the coal fields that, before integration. Just tremendous, terrific players. This state produced a lot of really good players. And, per capita, it doesn't compare to Ohio and Pennsylvania. But, you talk Randy Moss, one of the great players of one of the great natural talents of all time, West Virginia. I mean,
it's say per capita don't equal out, but when you look at the caliber,
right?
it's I don't know that there's anybody much better than what we've produced. Because you got Hall of Famers everywhere.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And you know what? We're having a good run of offensive linemen right now. I mean, look
Sure.
at what's been produced here in the last 5 to 10 years, and West Virginia's benefited. They haven't gotten them all, but a lot of the ones that they've gotten have been really good, high level players. I remember, Bill Kurlavich would tell me that one of the things that Don Nealon did, one of the things that he was able to do was he had time. After he beat Florida in the Peach Bowl, and then they beat Oklahoma 9 months later, he had time to be able to do what he wanted to do because he knew he couldn't recruit against Penn State and Pitt and get the elite linemen or whatnot, but he could develop them. And so he took players and over a 5-year period developed them into players as good as anybody. I remember Kurlav telling me he remembered Billy Legg. He said Billy Legg, when he came out of high school from Polka, was a good player, but we developed him. By the time he was done at the end of his career, he could play anywhere. And that's what Nealon did. And if you look at Nealon's career, it went in 5-year intervals.
Yep.
Beginning in 88 when he'd redshirted and had all those players. Then 93, right? He went back to the Sugar Bowl. And then 98, probably the most talented roster he ever had was that 98 team. Begin the year, they lose to Ohio State and then lost a couple of other games along the way, weren't able to get the momentum like those other two teams did. But he always felt that talent-wise, he probably had more pro players on that 98 team, but it was because he was in this pattern of developing players. He was a great coach at motivating guys, at getting guys to believe they could do more than they could. And he had a lot of guys on his staff that were, number one, were loyal, and number two, were very, very good at identifying players. I always hear the story they would tell about Donnie Young finding Steve Newberry, playing basketball, saw him at a basketball game, touch the top of the backboard. So that's the kind of guy I want. Steve Newberry couldn't bench the bar, but he was just a natural athlete and became a terrific player. So many stories like that. And yes, West Virginia has always been able to be to do more with less. That's always been kind of our motto, regardless of what era you look at. We've always been a little bit different, or tried to be a little different. If you look at what Rich Rodriguez did during his time here, a little bit different, the way they played offense, the way they played defense. We went over to basketball. John Beilein was a little bit different. I think you have to do that. You have to kind of get your niche. And, you take a school like Ohio State with all the resources that they have, okay? Well, they can play any way they want, but they're going to play the way everybody else plays because they have better players, right? So if your players line up and they're better than the team you're playing, well, then you better come up with a different way of doing things. And for the most part, we've had innovative, resourceful coaches here. And I think that's the way West Virginia's won. I think that's the way they're going to continue to win.
Yeah, he just keeps on. I'll tell you, the insights that come and the understanding, Darryl and Greg, it's just mind-blowing. We have to have him back.
Oh, yeah, he was phenomenal. And he just spits out that info with these names and years and all that stuff so easily. But yeah, that's a great point that he brings up about the football. You gotta figure out how to do things a little differently, and I don't think you have to completely change everything you do, but you do have to think a little differently. And we talked about Neil Brown a lot early on, and I think he's figured out some things and kind of has developed a type of football that the players are comfortable with and good at it. I think working in the portal and NIL, he's doing better with all that. And I just think it's a unique perspective to say, if you're not as good physically as the team across from you, you got to come up with a way to beat them. And I think West Virginia historically has been good at that. Now basketball, you look at our history of basketball with the good basketball players we had. I don't know that I don't know if that's necessarily the case in basketball so much. I take Darryl over anybody who plays the game straight up. And I think we've had a lot of basketball players like that over the years. But I think football is a little differently, again, with the numbers, the number of people you have to have and all that sort of thing. But, yeah, he's right. You got to find a different way to do it.
That's right. Yeah, we should have John back to talk about basketball over there. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yep.
Well, let's close it up with the fourth clip, and he keeps on talking in ways that I at least appreciate WVU even more because of what he says, and I think he really leaves some of the best stuff to the end here.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct, and as you talk, and I know Greg feels the same way. If you're related to West Virginia in any way, you should be proud of that. It applies to individuals too. Who are you? And basically try to be the best person you can be. And sometimes in sports, we sometimes believe the gold standard, in college sports, be like Ohio State or Texas or whatever. And you got to be the best you can be because the circumstances, it's uneven terrain. And so I think you're right. And the other thing it says is the people making the decision on who becomes a head coach, how critical that is to get a person who understands the circumstance,
right,
embraces it. And then this is the pattern again. Different athletic directors have made decisions that brought different coaches in, but they fit the pattern of being able to do what they needed to do given where they were. And to me, and I know Greg feels the same way, that's really critical. That is absolutely critical. And that's one of the things that history can teach you, and then be proud of that. Any final comments, Greg, questions before we bid John adieu?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you, you think with Neil Brown, do you feel like that he's kind of evolved to the point to where he understands the importance of grabbing these West Virginia players? Because it seems like he's focused more than our past few coaches on in-state talent. And he's gotten quite a few really good players. And I think I don't know if that was his plan coming in or if it's just kind of evolved that way. But do you feel like Neil Brown's kind of got it figured out here?
I think he's got he's got a full understanding of the situation. And I think every place you go, it doesn't matter what school you're at. Everybody has strengths and everybody has challenges. Obviously, you want to accentuate your strengths, minimize your challenges, and work around those. I mean, obviously, our strength, we've got a rabid fan base. We've got, it's the entire state. The entire state supports West Virginia athletics. And that's a very, very positive, powerful thing to have behind you. And then, obviously, where we are geographically, I think, historically, we've always been able to do well when we've gotten players within a reasonable drive of campus. Okay. I think Neil's approach is, 6 hours. I think that's what he's looking at. When Don Nealon got the job, that was his approach. I remember him telling me the story about, Bo Schembeck was like, Don, why would you take this job? I mean, I'm looking at the schedule and you play Pitt at the time. Pitt was terrific. Penn State was who they were. They dominated the East. And then you had Maryland, which had Jerry Claiborne, which was very good. You had all of these other schools on there. And he's going, Don, I look at this and I see Oklahoma coming on. He said, you can't win here. And Nealon said, well, Bo, I think I can, because he took out a map and he drew a circle around Morgantown. He said, I look around here and I see all these places and I feel like I can get 25 good players a year within a reasonable drive of this campus. And that was his approach. And then he met a guy named Rick Perry, who was down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And he said, Don, there are a ton of West Virginians that now live in Florida. You need to get down here. And Nealon said, I don't have the resources. I can't cover the whole state. We don't have the resources to be able to do it. He said, no, don't do that. Just focus on Broward and Dade County. There is enough people down here. And Florida State and Florida and Miami, they can't get all these guys. There are enough good players. You can come down here and get a few. And they did it with Andrew Johnson. And from Andrew Johnson, and then eventually they kept going and going and going. And eventually they got better players. So they were getting all of their linemen and all of their a lot of their bigger players around the local area, and they were getting their skill and their speed in Florida. And if you look at what Neil Brown has done, what the last few years, it's a similar strategy. You know, he's kind of focused on that circle around the campus, and I think he's getting guys that are hungry. I think we do better when we got players that are hungry and want to prove themselves, as opposed to maybe guys that are looking for other reasons, whatever those reasons are. We've always seemed to do better doing that. And I think Neil now, after 5 years of being here and experiencing the things that he's experienced, and I think he's got a real good understanding and knowledge of the unique situation we have here, our strengths and our weaknesses. And I think you're starting to see the fruits of the labor, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, I'll tell you, we said at the beginning that no one does it better than John Antonik. And boy, you just gave us a class in the history of WVU football that I think is really important. And actually, one of the reasons Greg and I wanted to do this now is that there's no better time than between now and spring football to get boned up on the history, because I think it helps us understand, brings a deeper and richer perspective to understanding where we are now, where we could go. Right. And so thank you so much for spending the time with us. And I hope we'll have you back in the future. You're just a gift, and we appreciate so much the work you do for the university.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Good
stuff. He, again, a wealth of knowledge, and he writes great articles too. If you, if you have a big interest in WVU, read these articles. He does. He writes some great stuff. I wanted to give you the basketball score real quick. WVU women are leading 41-10 in the third quarter, and I thought, man, Houston must really be bad, but they're 11-5, and West Virginia is putting the beat down on them. So 41-10 right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, and it also relates to basketball too, I think, Darryl. You know, it's over time, what we're doing is really putting together pieces of the puzzle. And, you know, we have to pay homage to the folks who went before. And we sometimes don't do that, not just at WVU, but elsewhere. You know, I'm a person, and again, I'm not a native West Virginia. I came to West Virginia in the late 60s, early 70s. You know, you look at whom you played for, Gail Catlin, is a really critical figure in the history of WVU athletics basketball. Freddie Schaus is another. That name sort of fades. You know, he was AD here, coach here, player. You know, it's just these names are so important. And I think for me, what it does is it enables me to, when I engage in conversation with people, have a deeper understanding of the history of the university, and that helps me understand where we are now and where we could go. And I think what John's saying in so many words is that there seems to be a profile of coaches who make a big difference over time if you give them enough time. And he said that with Don Nealon. And Neil Brown is one of those. And we have an opportunity, I think, coming up in basketball to do the same thing.
Yeah, Coach Cadlett, you know, I never, you know, nobody talked about West Virginia from this area back when I was coming up. You know, Gary McPherson is another person that is underrated as assistant coach. He was here recruiting another kid on my team, and who ended up going to Kansas, and he developed a relationship. And you know, then you know, when I came, I made it okay for Chris Brooks to come. You know what I mean? And we made it okay for the guys to come after us because it wasn't we were highly recruited and highly publicized guys coming out of high school. I was third team All-American. I think Chris was first team All-American. And before then, wasn't too many, you know, high profile guys coming to Morgantown. Then I think we made it okay. Catlett, you know, he dipped into New York. He dipped into DC. You know, I think before the shenanigans what happened with Coach Huggins, he was talking about coming back to the DC area. You know, he's missed out on a player here. that he could have gotten. But it is what it is. But like, there's so much talent in that 6-hour drive, as he said. The 6 hours from Morgantown, there's 3 hours of DC, it's 3 hours of Columbus, Ohio. So what I mean, like 6 hours is a long way, and you just got to be creative in recruiting. Like when I was at Morgan State, I had to be creative. You know what I mean? You had to figure out the third person on the team who has potential. You know what I mean? Does he have the potential to be a big time player? Yes. So recruit that person. You might get a gem. You can't recruit 10 of them. You know what I mean? It might be just 1 or 2, and at a position here and there. But it's just, you have to be creative, and the person who comes to West Virginia has to be creative. I think Huggies did a job. It was about 8 years ago. He inherited a good team when I was coaching at Georgetown. They were really good. Joe Alexander, Deshaun Butler, and all those guys. Then he had another group with a bunch of name players, but they didn't play the way he wanted them to play. And I remember Larry Harrison said, we're going to go back to our old way. And the Javon Carters of the world come in, and they play hard. They press Virginia. And you got to get your kind of guys. And I think in this league, the Big 12, especially basketball, you need a guy that's close to being a pro, NBA player, because you're going to play against pros. Or you're going to have a bunch of good players. Like say right now, I think they have a bunch of good players, and they just got to put it all together.
Yep. I think this goes along with what we were talking about earlier. You just have to think outside the box, and you got to do things a little bit differently. I think we all recognize that. And I think, a lot of times when the coaches come in, they don't, and it takes them a while to figure that out. And you just got to give them some time to figure it out. And I think Neil Brown's figured it out. I don't know if Josh will be here after this year, but it may take him a little time to figure that out as well. And whoever you bring in, it's a different, I don't want to say a culture, but it's a different place. And there's just a certain way that things have to be done, and it's not always traditional. So I think Darryl's right. You gotta recruit that, that third guy on the team and that has that potential, and develop him into that hard-nosed player that you want. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. Guys, that's we are getting close to being out of time here for tonight. I saw in the blur behind me, the cloud just went by, Frank, and he's my ride home tonight. So he's pacing back and forth behind me. So I guess we need to wrap this thing up for another night. Fantastic show, Darryl. Thanks again for all your insight. Always great to hear your thoughts on all these things. Just fantastic. And of course, John, great with his as well. Frank, as always, great job by you. And we appreciate everybody joining us. We want to encourage you again to subscribe on YouTube to the Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now. That always helps us out. And we look forward to coming to you again next Wednesday with another great show. So thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.
See you later.